Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. I think I have to turn it on. Bismillah. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So, alhamdulillah, we talked about the development of Tajweed last week, briefly. If we just briefly review, there was the oral tradition, which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught the Sahaba, and nothing was written at the time yet. There were masahif were being compiled, and the surahs were being written down, but it was not compiled fully until the time of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anh. And in the 2nd and 3rd century, Sayyidina Uthman, Uthman radiyallahu anh. Then 2nd and 3rd century of Hijrah, you have books of qira'at and books of lugha, which is books of the different recitations of the Quran and books of Arabic. But there was no book specifically for Tajweed yet. In the 4th century, means the 300s after Hijri, then specific books of Tajweed started to be written as a specific science. And I mentioned some of the ulama who wrote on the subject. So Imam Sibawayh, he wrote on Arabic as a language, Arabic grammar. So in these books, they would talk about Arabic pronunciation, grammar, and many different rules. And at the end, you can see Imam Ibn al-Jazari. He is a master in the field. He passed away in the year 833 Hijri, the Hijri calendar. So now, inshallah, over the next 3 weeks, we will talk about the Makharij of the letters. So the Makharij is the place where the letter is pronounced. Means where the tongue touches in your mouth, the lips touching, the tongue touching which part of the teeth or which part of the throat. So we have 17 different makharij of the letters. And those 17 makharij are divided on 5 body parts in the mouth and the throat. So it says 5 organs in the sense of body parts. For example, the first one is al-jawf. Jawf means the open space between when your mouth is open and the throat. So that is the first one. The second is the throat letters. Right? Ayn, ha, right? You feel it in your throat. A, kha, these are the throat letters. Then we have the tongue, right? Al-lisan. The tongue has most of the letters of Arabic come from the tongue. Right? There's 18 letters. 18 letters from Arabic all come from the tongue. Different part of the tongue. The tip of the tongue, middle, back, the side. And then we have ash-shafatayn, which means the lips. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْن وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْن. The lips. Right? For example, ba and mim. And last one is the nasal cavity, meaning the nose. The nose, it doesn't have a specific letter in Arabic, but it has a sound. The sound is called gunna. Right? In Urdu we have noon gunna. So is the nasal sound. So these are the 5 parts of the mouth and throat, the 5 organs. And khayshum, the nasal cavity, the nose. Ji. Khayshum. And now we're going to go one by one and talk about the letters. So when we talk about the letters, we're not going to go in the order of the alphabet, like alif, ba, ta. We're going to go in the order of the makharij. So we will go from the bottom of the throat up, forward, and then the back of the tongue forward all the way to the lips, to the nose. So we're going to go from bottom up. That's the order we will talk about the makhraj. Okay. The first makhraj is the jawf, which I mentioned. Jawf is the openness when you leave the mouth open and the throat open. Right? And these have three letters, the three letters of mad. Mad means to stretch. When you say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, right? That's stretching. And it has three letters. The three letters are alif, waw, and ya. Alif is different than the letter hamza, which I'll mention briefly. But these three letters are from just by leaving the mouth open. Leave it open, you don't touch any part of your tongue anywhere. The throat, right? You don't constrict it. For example, when you pronounce ayn, a. If you don't use the throat and don't use the mouth, the tongue, it's just a, right? A, oo, e. Is by leaving your mouth empty. And you can see here, in the image, it just shows that this area, the throat and the mouth, are open. Yeah, he's mentioning the jawf al-fam, mean the mouth, and the second is the throat. Jawf just means a gap or cavity, like open. In the Quran it says, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ, means that they separate themselves from their beds and they stand up at night and pray. So the same root, jawf. So the jawf is for the letters of mad. Whenever you stretch something, right? Ya, the ya has another makhraj, but the alif, ya, that's from the jawf. Or when you say amanu, right? Ooh, that sound is you can feel it. You can picture it. Your mouth is empty and you're saying ooh, and like iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. I would like to share this video just to show. This video is just to show a practical example of student reciting to a teacher. Right. Not sure if the audio will share here. Yes, the slides and the links. Yes, links enabled. Yeah, sure, inshallah. Okay, bismillah. You able to hear? I want you to pay attention to where he corrects him. So this is a very detailed level of tajweed, which most of us may not be able to identify. What is he correcting him on? Right? It's very difficult to identify. What is he correcting on? So we just talked about letters of mad, stretching. E. So this sheikh, by the way, Sheikh Abdullah Al-Jarullah, he's a teacher of some of the imams of the haram. Yeah, he's very senior sheikh. in Medina, and he's a doctor as well, mashallah. So one of my teachers is his student. So he's very, he's an expert in his field. So you could tell the way he's correcting that the mad e it should be from the jof, and it should be the kasra should be clear. Right? Instead of saying like e, right? Stretching it and keeping it clear. The correction was, instead of saying e, right? He's saying e. Make the kasra. Kasra is clear. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. Right? مالك يوم الدين. E. When you stretch it, you say E. Yes. Yeah, what not to do is, it's very subtle. So this level of tajweed, maybe we won't, explore in this class, but this is just to, yeah, it's very refined. This is just to expose us, so we know. Maybe we won't be able to practice this level yet, because there's a lot of steps before we get that, but we can know that there is levels of tajweed. Yes. Oh, the first one was up here, right? This one. So when you pronounce the kasra, he's saying to kind of open your mouth in a way you almost smile. Right? E. That's the correction, right? So alif is different than hamza. Many times when we grow up learning the Arabic alphabet, we learn right, alif, ba, ta, tha, right? And then maybe hamza at the end. Or maybe we don't even include hamza. So what's the difference between hamza and alif? Alif never has any haraka. Alif only has sukoon. So in this example, when I say amanu, the first letter in red is hamza. A. The second letter in green is the alif. Now, so alif doesn't ever have fatha or dhamma, right? It only has sukoon. And it only comes after a fatha. When you say billahi, right? A'udhu billahi. So first you have lam with fatha, and then you have alif, right? Billah. So the second letter is the alif. Is that clear? Hamza is a. Hamza can have fatha, right? A. It can have dhamma, u. It can have kasra, e. So that's hamza, and has different makharij than alif. But alif, the one we're talking about now, which is from the openness of the mouth and the throat, that is the second letter in green. A, right? A, hamza, and then alif. Yeah. I think I haven't looked at it in a long time. I think Zair is fatha. Okay. Yeah, you know better than me. Yeah. Zabar is fatha, Zair kasra, pesh, dhamma. And then the sukoon is the same. Jazm, yes. Or, yeah. Yes, so that's what for some of them, we'll try to relate it to Urdu so you can connect it, and some will need to be relearned, yeah. Okay, so since we're talking about mad, here also you have wow, amanu, right? Ooh, you stretch the wow. So wow also has two different pronunciation. One is when you have wow with the haraka, right? With fatha, dhamma, kasra, zair, zabar, pesh, right? Like wa, right? Wa and we. that has a makhraj of the lips, if you notice, wa. So we're not talking about that wow, we're talking about this wow when you stretch. The wow of mad, that's what it's called, wow of mad. When we say amanu, wow with the sukoon, right? This noon, I didn't write it, but the noon has a dhamma. Right? Ooh, amanu. So when you stretch, it should be from the openness of the mouth and the throat. It should not be from the nose. Sometimes people make this mistake when they say like amanu, right? It's kind of nasal sound. Ooh. It should be ooh. And one way that we can practice that is you can pinch the nose a little bit. If the sound changes, that means you're using your nose to pronounce it, right? Ooh, right? You hear the difference? Ooh. So that shows that you're pronouncing from the nose. But if you're pronouncing without the nose, just from the openness of the mouth and the throat, the jawf, it would sound like ooh. So then if you plug the nose, you don't see it. Ooh, right? No difference. Yeah, so you like I mentioned, the nose has makhraj. It is a makhraj of ghunna. We'll talk about that later. But when you stretch, you don't want nasal sound. The nasal sound is not it should not be heard. Right? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Al-kafirun instead of al-kafirun. You hear the nasal sound? Yes. This is called the ta'awudh, right? Ta'awudh. Here I highlighted all the letters of mad. A'udhu. Sometimes people make the mistake where they don't add the waw. They say a'udhu, a'udhu, right? Almost like there's no waw. It has mad. A'udhu. And then a'udhu billahi. Notice that's the mad, right? The alif. There's no alif written in the name of Allah, but it's pronounced. Billahi. Mina shaytani. Ash-shaytan. Right? Notice there's a ta and that's followed by alif. Means you stretch it. And then mina shaytanir rajim. E. So you have the mad of alif and you have mad of waw and you have the mad of ya, all in the ta'awudh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Yeah. So if you notice, your mouth is open. It's not closed. The tongue is not touching anywhere. The throat is open. It's relaxed. That's how you get a clean sound of oo, e. Yeah, again here. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. One important thing I want to show here, and this goes into discussion of the sifat, right? First we're talking about makhraj, then we'll talk about sifat, which is the qualities of the letters. Is it heavy, is it light, is there qalqala, etc. All that we'll talk about after 2 or 3 more weeks. Alif, how should it be pronounced? Should it be pronounced like or right? How should it be pronounced? So, for example, this alif, after the hamza, it should be pronounced amanu, instead of yeah. Amanu, instead of amanu. Yeah, ya, it should not be ya ayyuhalladhina it's ya. Yes. Yeah, a little too much to the opposite side. So there's there's then there's right? Like So sometimes you pronounce like that, but not in this place. Yeah. Sometimes in different qira'at, I don't know if maybe you have heard, like they say wadduhi, right? Wadduhi. So that's a correct recitation, but it's a different recitation. The most common, especially that we hear, is Hafs, right? Imam Hafs. His recitation is especially here, everyone's going to pronounce this the same, by the way. Amanu, amanu. So that's one thing, maybe we've learned a certain way. It'll take practice, but it should not be amanu, right? Al-iman instead of al-iman. But by the way, not just Desis, but even some Arab dialects today and at the time of the Sahaba, they would speak like that. So the Arabic dialect is fine. They used to say salah, right? Salah and zakah. They used to say those things. So that's fine. That was their dialect. But when it comes to the Quran, the way that's been preserved and taught and learned was pronouncing the alif this way. Salah, right? Hayya ala salah. Yeah, salah instead of salah. Hayya ala al-falah, right? Falah instead of falah. Yeah? The name of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, it sometimes you'll hear the a and a, and we'll talk about why that changes. Maybe if it's followed by dhamma, fatha or kasra, right? But here, for example, you don't say a'udhu billah, say a'udhu billah. Yes, light, yes. A'udhu billah. But notice, after shaitan, how do you say that alif? The alif is a little different, right? You don't say like ta, right? You say ta, ah. Now you're pronouncing it heavy. So that's where the ah sound comes. Ah, it depends on the letter before it. So not only that, but here you have, for example, amanu, right? It has fatha, but it's pronounced light. Ah. Ta has fatha, same haraka, but it's pronounced heavy. Ta, right? Mina shayta. So hopefully the main thing I want to just express is how should the alif be pronounced. Usually, most commonly, it should be pronounced a, not a, but a. And sometimes it will be pronounced a based on the previous letter, like أعوذ بالله من الشيطان أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Here another example in Surah An-Nas. قل أعوذ برب الناس instead of nas. قل أعوذ برب الناس. Yes. Now, when we talk about the mad, each letter of mad matches one of the haraka. Okay, so you have alif, that matches fatha, right? Which was a zabar, zabar. Then you have the ya, right? E, that matches the zair, the kasra. And then dhamma matches the waw, right? So, same thing. How should this be pronounced? Should it be pronounced like al, or should it be pronounced al? Al, alhamdu, or alhamdu, right? So same thing. Ya, bi rabbin nas. So same thing. Is just the short version of that. Alhamdu. Right? Not alhamdu. 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 Yes. For Tajweed, there might be, I know there's one for memorization. There's a good software for memorization. For Tajweed, I'm not sure. For that level. Yeah, that would take a lot of coding. But maybe, inshallah. There's teachers. That's the best way. Now, the haraka that matches the dhamma, that is, the haraka that matches waw, that's dhamma. So, right? And here example, qul. For dhamma, you need to move the lips forward. Exactly. Round the lips. You have to round the lips. if you don't round the lips fully, you won't get the full dhamma. So like the difference between maybe like qul, right? Qul and qul. Qul and qul. Ooh, right? Ooh. Qul. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Right? The hu also, and huwa, it has dhamma. So hu, huwa, huwa. And then you have, I didn't put the haraka, but ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. I remember, I think you asked last time, right? So is it a or is it e or is it a, right? So each haraka is very specific in how you pronounce it. A is a, it's not a. U, you have to round the lips. U. And kasra is e. It's not a and it's not e. Now, you know, in English we have the letter I. Sometimes that letter I is pronounced like a, like for example, like fish, a, right? It's like short, a. And sometimes it's pronounced long, right? Like e. So here, that's how this is. The kasra is always e, right? E, ihdina. Ihdina si, right? Si instead of se. The difference between se and si. Ihdina si. Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. Al-mustaqim. If you want, you can maybe any questions, or we'd like to practice a little bit for this. Any questions first? Brothers or sisters also, welcome for questions. Is this making sense? See? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So along with the lessons, we can practice a little bit, but we do have 2 dedicated sessions. The final 2 weeks will be for practice, specifically on Fatiha and some of the shorter surahs, inshallah. Yeah, inshallah. Yes. Okay. The adhan, right? So yeah, Tajweed plays into the adhan just as much, right? For example, we were talking about this last week. Hayya al-falah, right? If you say Hayya al-falah with a ha, it means come to success. If you say with the small ha, right? Hayya al-falah, you know what falah means? Falah just means like an empty space, like a desert or a plain. You know, come to the empty land. So, you know, calling people toward Tajweed plays into the adhan just as well. So your question was a specific question? For which one? Yes. So what I mentioned, there's some dialects that used to say salah, right? Salah, but the lam is a light letter, so we'll say hayya ala salah. Yeah. Although in another recitation, Warsh, he does say salah, but for our purposes, hayya ala salah, right? So it's not too much like le, and it's not la. Hayya ala salah, and same thing with the falah. Hayya ala al-falah. When we talk about the ha and the ain, which we will today, inshallah, the throat letters, we can that'll help you pronouncing the hayya part. Hayya ala. Right? It's interesting because sometimes when people don't, they haven't studied tajweed or even at a basic level, they may make some light letters heavy. I've heard people saying for the iqama, ashhadu, right? Ashhadu an la ilaha, right? Adding the ha, right? Making it very like la ilaha, like making the hamza into a ayn. This is making it sound more Arabic. The kalima is actually very easy to pronounce. You don't need the throat like a heavy ayn or ha or anything. La ilaha illallah. That's it. I had one professor in college also. He said, yeah, he was non-Muslim. He was pronouncing the kalima. He said, yeah, they say la ilaha illallah. He added the ha and the ayn. So knowing the difference is very important, especially in recitation. I mentioned lahan jali and lahan khafi. The mistakes. Someone makes a ayn into a hamza or ha to a ha, it could change the meaning completely. Or at the very least, it'll it will just make a word that doesn't have any meaning. Yes, yes. Yeah, so this is another example of the kasra. B, right? Amanna. Sometimes you hear people, amanna bih. Bih, right? But I said kasra is not A, it's E. Amanna bih. Yeah, it should be B. Another way to maybe help us understand. See, when you have this in mind, it might just help. It helped me try to understand this, so that's why I'm sharing this. E, right? B, as written in English, B. Now, someone may ask, doesn't this turn it into a stretch, like mad? No, it doesn't, because you don't stretch it for 2 harakas. You don't stretch it for like 2 seconds, just 1 second. B, that's it, it's short. The 2 E's I put there so that we understand it's a E sound and not a A sound. A. B, yes. Amanna bi. Yes. 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 So the haraka, the stretch that's a whole chapter itself. Maybe not this course, but in the future, intermediate or something, we can talk about mad, how to stretch and when to stretch, how long to stretch. There's a whole discussion based on that. So, but for this sake, we're just talking about the makharij of the letters which you stretch, like a, u, e, and how the haraka should be pronounced. But you call this one haraka. One haraka. You can say like 1 second. B. Instead of B, that would be B is stretching it, right? B. So I'm saying don't stretch it, but make sure it's a E sound and not A. Amanna bi, right? For example, Bismillah instead of B, right? Bismillah versus B. Bismillah. Is the difference clear? Bismillah and Bismillah. B. So yeah, the thing about transliteration, when we transliterate to English, they still keep the I, but the I is pronounced E. Yeah, for the sake of ease, I put the 2 E's here, but that's its own science, like how to transliterate. So like, for example, maybe some of us have the name like Abdul Rahim, for example, right? Abdul Rahim. Sometimes you see with 2 E's, sometimes you say with the I, Rahim. So that's a little separate transliteration. Okay, I need to actually add one to make. Yes. IB. EB, yeah. No, there's a line on top of it. Yeah, so when you look at like strict transliteration, they have a line on top of the I. So that's where the E, right? Yes, that's for stretching. So that's a good example. Like the 2 E's help people, because people who don't know proper transliteration, it's you have to study it in school. If you don't know that, then the 2 E's help you make the E sound. Yes. Sorry, I'm just updating one of the slides. Okay. So that's as far as the jawf. Next makhraj is going up, is the throat. So we'll go bottom of the throat, middle of the throat, and top of the throat. We have 3 parts of the throat. No, that one was the open, just keeping the mouth and throat open, jawf. this is the one. So this is the next makharaj, which has basically, these are the next three makharij. There's three makharij. You split the throat into three. One is the bottom, and then middle and top. Bottom, if you see, I'm not sure, hopefully you can see, there's two letters, Hamza and Ha. I said Hamza is different than Alif. It's a different letter. So Hamza is actually one of the most difficult letters in Arabic, believe it or not. Why? Because to pronounce it correctly from all the way from the bottom of the throat, it takes effort. It takes a lot of effort to pronounce it. Instead of saying like ah is like you're pronouncing from the mouth almost, right? Ah. Pronouncing it from the bottom is ah. It's a very strong letter. Yeah, farthest. Yes. That's yeah. In Arabic we say aqsa, the farthest part. So the farthest part of the throat, meaning farthest from the front of the mouth. So the farthest part. The bottom of the throat. To make it easy for us, the bottom of the throat. Hamza and Ha, both are difficult letters. We think like A and H, they're easy, right? No, they're actually very difficult to pronounce them correctly in Arabic. If you notice Ha, it's different than like in English when you say like, for example, like happy, Ha, right? Versus Ha. It's very like deep sound. Ha. Al-ha, al-haakumut takathur. If you hear like some native Arab speaking, they pronounce the ha like that, very deep, very like with their breath. Al-ha, al-haakumut takathur. As opposed to like al-ha, al-ha, al-ha. It's very deep. You can hear the vibration. You can feel it actually. You should feel it in the bottom of the throat. Al-ha. Yes. Maybe you're trying to do al-ha. Maybe you're thinking, yeah. So this is we call it like the small ha, right? So this is here al-ha versus the other one. If you see al-ha, middle one, yes. Al-ha, like al-haqqa. That's ha. Yeah. So we'll get yes. So we'll get to the middle one. The bottom one has Hamza and Ha. Ha. Hamza is actually so difficult that sometimes it's omitted. For example, in the word Iman, originally the word was Itman, Al-Itman, but the Hamza is a difficult letter. So what they did to make it easy, means the Arabs naturally what happened is, they just took it out the Hamza and they made it into Ya. So instead of Al-Itman, they say Al-Iman. They just changed it. They completely changed it. So it's easy to pronounce. Or, for example, when you say Al-Ard, right? Hamza, Lam, and then Hamza again. Al-Ard. In other qira'at, like Warsh, he just skips the Hamza. He says Al-Ard. Al-Ard. So if you hear that, that's the reason we have stretching in Arabic, like Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you notice, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Why do you stretch it? You stretch it because there's a Hamza after. So when you stretch it, you give yourself some time so you can prepare yourself to pronounce the Hamza. Ya ayyu, right? And for example, Minas sama, there's a Hamza at the end. Why do you stretch it? So you can pronounce the Hamza properly. Minas sama. So you hear the Hamza at the end, it's very strong. As opposed to just saying Minas sama. You don't hear any Hamza. Minas sama. Minas sama. You stop abruptly. You stop strongly. And you have to stop in the bottom of the throat. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح. You hear the a. So Hamza is considered, it's one of the most difficult letters to consistently pronounce correctly. Because if maybe you don't have energy or you're just not trying, it's very easy to not pronounce it strongly. So it's not too difficult to get to that, right? If you practice, you can probably get it. But to make sure every time you recite this letter, every time it comes, to pronounce it always strongly from the bottom of the throat is difficult. And same thing with the ha. Especially, for example, when stopping on the letter ha, al-qari'ah, you hear the ha. As opposed to al-qari'ah, you don't hear the ha. Al-qari'ah, la rayba fih, la rayba fih. You have to hear it. Yeah, and the example I give in Surah Al-Takathur, al-ha, al-hakum al-takathur. Yeah. Any question on Hamza and Ha before we move on? No. Hamza and Ha. Ha. Like Taha. Taha. Next, above that is Ayn and Ha. Ayn and Ha. Ayn and Ha have the same makhraj, so they sound similar. A, Ha, A, Ha, I, Hi. They sound very similar, but Ha has more. It has more air. Ha. Yeah. Middle of the throat, yes. The deep part of the throat is the ha. Yeah. So the middle of the throat is ha and a. Ayn is a little difficult, especially if someone is learning in the beginning or someone accepted Islam, they need to learn ayn because there's no same letter in Arabic. There's no throat letters, sorry, in English, right? That even when you talk about the kha, there's no kha, so they'll just pronounce like ka, right? They don't really use the throat. But Arabic we have these 6 letters of the throat. So for the ha, it's light, meaning ha instead of ha. So alhamdu. So you pronounce the hamza strong and you pronounce the ayn strong from the middle. Alhamdu. Bismillahir Rahman. Ar-Rah. You hear the Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, right? Hi, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. And then for the Ain, it should also be pronounced strong, like Adab or Alim. Wallahu Alimun Hakim. Right? Now you have example of Ain and Ha next close to each other. Alimun Hakim. A. Also with the A, you don't want to hold it too much. Like sometimes people pronounce it like alimun, right? They're holding it too much. Anytime you pronounce haraka, you just touch it. You don't want to hold it like drag. Alimun. That would be incorrect. Alimun. Alimun. Yeah, just one haraka. Yeah, you don't holding it would be like giving shadda, right? Like fa'alun lima yurid. That you hold it. Fa'alun. But without that, it's just alimun, Sometimes, yeah, the reason I'm saying I've noticed sometimes people will hold it. Wallahu alimun. No, that's incorrect. Wallahu alimun hakim. Also, when pronouncing sukoon on the ayn, there are 2 ways that it's done. And you'll hear experts pronounce one way and other experts pronounce the other way. That is like na'budu. How to pronounce that, right? Iyyaka na'budu. Is it na'budu or is it na'budu or is it na'budu, right? There's different ways you might hear. So this part you have to make sure that you pronounce the ayn instead of saying na'budu. There's no ayn there, na'budu, right? Na'budu, right? Na' from the middle, na'budu. But also you'll hear they pronounce the ayn but not as strong. They'll say na'budu, na'budu. So I've heard expert qurra recite that way as well. So that's okay. But the point is that the ayn has to be pronounced. Iyyaka na'budu. Also, sometimes people will bounce it a little bit. Na'abudu. Na'abudu. It should be, you should hold it. Na'budu. Not iyyaka na'budu. Iyyaka na'budu. Yeah, it should not roll or bounce, right? No, when you talk about qalqala, we can talk about that, right? And then we have ghayn and kha. So ghayn and kha is the top of the throat. Right? So all these, I want us all to, when we pronounce it, try to feel where it's being pronounced. A, ha, and then you go up, kha, gha. Right? So kha, it should be, sometimes people mix it with the ha. They go a little too low, so it sounds like ha, ha, right? That's mixing it with the ha. It should be up here. Kha, khi, khalidina fiha. Kha, kha. Notice kha is heavy. So you don't say like kha. You don't say kha. No. Yes. So that brings me to another important point about the alif and about the haraka. Which haraka did I say you round the lips? The dhamma. Oo, right? Oo and the waw. Yes. For the other haraka, you don't round the lips. For fatha, you don't round the lips. Right? When you say or for example here, you don't say kha. Right? That's a common mistake. But you only round the lips for dhamma, right? Dhamma and waw. And the letters whose makharij is the lips. Do these have the makharij of the lips? No, the makharij is the throat. So if it has makharij of the throat, and there's no dhamma, there's no lips. You don't need to use the lips. Actually, you should not use the lips. The teachers will correct you. Saying kha and like ta, right? Like shaytan. Saying shaytan. This has to do with the sifat, the attributes. How to make a letter heavy? Is it by using your lips, by saying shaytan, or by saying like, right, swad, right? We learned this when we were kids, right? Say swad, right? Dad, right? But you don't use your lips, right? Kha. You use your tongue. You use the back of your tongue. The back of the tongue, when it lifts up, it makes it heavy. Kha. As opposed to like kha. Kha is light. Kha. Ka, right? Kha. So you don't need to use your lips. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So yeah. So the mix with Persian and Arabic and different things. So it has influence definitely. And again, speaking, even if it's Arabic in a different dialect, that's fine. But this is specifically to the Quran. When reciting, it has to be specific, because you'll see people who speak Arabic, whatever dialect they do, they'll pronounce however they want. That's fine. But when it comes to Quran, they'll fix it and make sure that, yes. Kha and Gha. Kha and Gha are very close in makhraj, and they're both at the top. But the Gha, it should not sound like a Kha, right? Gha is like Ghayril, Gha, Ghi, right? Maghdubi. You know when you say Astaghfirullah, right? It's with a Ghayn, not a Kha. Instead of Astagh, right? A lot of people say that. Astaghfir, right? It's Astaghfirullah. Right? Yes, yeah. Astaghfirullah. Instead of Astaghfirullah, Wastaghfirullah. So the reason why it's difficult, because Kha is easier to pronounce than Ghayn. So when they're, sometimes to make it easy, we'll just switch to the other letter. But it'll make a meaning different. Istighfar comes from Ghafoor, right? It comes from Ghafara. You're asking Allah to forgive you, Ghufran. Khafara has a different meaning, right? The Kha, that's a completely different meaning. So you want to ask Allah to forgive you. Astaghfirullah. A little more from the you need more sound of the vocal cords. Gha, astagh, maghdubi, ghayril maghdubi. Yeah. Yes. Both are with Kha. Yes. Is it about the heaviness. Yeah. So the kha is pronounced the same, kha and kha, but the second one has a waw with a sukoon. So you say kha khaw. You round for the waw, not for the kha. Yeah, yeah, khaw, right? And that's for any letter. When you say like وآمنهم من خوف, right? Kha, kha, khawf. Yes. Okay. Any questions about the throat letters? Not for now. Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. And again, we will practice inshallah, and we can one by one at the end. But I would recommend also listen. Now that we know what the differences are and where it is. Now when you listen to your favorite reciter, you'll be able to tell what's the difference between him and me. You know, you'll be able. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, inshallah, we'll, yeah, this, I mean, that's kind of a broad thing, meaning you'll have to, there's no like set, like surahs for things. It's basically the surahs that have these letters. Like these, for example, I'm giving examples where those are there, like Kha in Surah Quraysh, right? آمنهم من خوف, right? The Hamza is in like Surah Ikhlas, Surah Falaq, Surah Nas. قل أعوذ, or Allah, Allahu Samad, etc. But we have the two sessions at the end which will devote specifically for the practicing all of this in the at the end. After we studied every makhraj and attribute, then it will make more sense to practice. Yes, yeah, inshallah, I'm collecting those and we'll bring it to practice those specifically. The common places, Surah Fatiha and the small surahs in Juz Amma, inshallah. Yes, ha is from deep, ha, and then ha is from middle. Ha is actually deeper, right? The small ha, which we thought maybe not that deep, is actually deeper than the big ha. Ha. Yeah, so there's two names actually. There's Harith, with his ha and the tha. Harith, that comes from harth, right? Farming. And then there's Haris, which is ha and then the actual scene, Haris. That is a guard. So Harith and Haris. Yeah, that's ha with a sad. Yeah, yeah, Harisun. Yeah. Yeah, last week I talked about how sometimes we pronounce 4 or 5 letters all the same. Seen and sad and tha. In Urdu sometimes we pronounce them all the same. Or like tha and, dhal and zai and dha and dad, all pronounced like za. And we'll go more in detail of the qaf. Qaf has a lot of detail. But we finished from the letters of the throat. 6 letters. After that, we're going to start the letters of the tongue. Tongue goes from the back of the tongue, which is qaf. And then you go from the middle, like jeem, and then you go to the front, like ta, etc. We'll talk about all those 18 letters. We'll spend one whole class, maybe more than one class, covering the tongue letters. And then 2 weeks from now, or whenever the second class is after that, we'll finish the Makharij. And we'll review all of them in practice. So qaf, just, I know the time is ending. Qaf is from the back of the tongue. So if you notice here, you see the back of the tongue is raised and is touching the top of the you call it the throat or the back palate, the mouth. Qa, qa. So it's not the tip of your tongue, right? When you say qa, it's the back of your tongue, the part that's by the throat. Qa, qi, right? Qaf. Yeah. So that part, qaf, I mentioned, it's really strong letter. When you don't put the pressure, then it starts sounding like other letters which are nearby. For example, the kha. Qa, if you're a little relaxed, then it's like kha. Kha, qa. Why do we switch the letters? Because the makharij is so close. Makharij is right now we know why do Hyderabadis do this? Why do you make the qaf into kha? Because the makharij is so close. So we say kha. Right? So, but then when you write the letter qaf in English, how do we write it? Q, right? Yeah, it depends. Yeah, sometimes we write the K. So we usually with Q, right? The Quran. Q, U, yeah. Yes, yeah. So the U, right? They do. So remember, the qa is heavy, not with the lips. So that U is kind of showing that you use the lips, although that's incorrect technically. Yeah, no, it's there just to show that the qa has the U, and in English, Q always comes with the U after. In the English language, that's just the rule. Q always is followed by U. But one thing I just wanted to mention before finishing is kha. How is that written in English? KH. Yeah. So when we have a qaf, it's written with a Q, and when we have KH, it's written with. So when we have kha, it's written with KH. But sometimes in our community, when we get so confused, we'll write the kha with the Q. Yes, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. But that might be more like Urdu or some other language. Yeah, we don't in Arabic. There's no. Yeah. What I was mentioning, I just want to finish with this. Is sometimes you write kha with a Q because we think that Q was originally a qaf. So, for example, Quran khatam, you'll see some people write khatam with a Q because they think khatam is with a qaf because they just pronounce with a kha. So all the confusion came because of this. Right? So the Quran is written with the qaf with the Q, and the khatam is written kha with the KH. Yeah. We'll talk about more. I know the qaf is really interesting. Sometimes people pronounce with the ga also. Ga. Instead of yaqulu, they say yagulu. So all those discussions we'll talk about next week, inshallah. Any questions? Yeah, these slides I will send, and I'm still working on finding a text that I think will fit. So inshallah, I'll send that. I have the emails for most. If I don't have, you can share with. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So jazakallah khair. Jazakallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun al mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.